That fifth rejection letter sat on Garrett Cole's dirty workbench right next to a half-eaten sandwich and a patent worth more than Claire Ashford's entire loan portfolio. She stamped denied over his name 5 separate times in just 14 months. She never once asked what this quiet mechanic was actually building. 11 months later, Claire stood in his driveway, shivering in a coat far too thin for a brutal Colorado December, begging the very man whose business plan she ignored to rescue the only credit union in Ridgeline. Without his garage and the $2.1 million flowing through it, her bank had 90 days before regulators shut the doors she once slammed in his face. 2 years before that final arrogant rejection, Garrett Cole sold his modest 3-bedroom home in Long Beach, California, loaded a truck with mechanics tools and a box of his late wife's pictures, and headed east with his 11-year-old son, Nolan, sleeping in the passenger seat. Jenna had been gone for exactly 4 months. The doctors called it aggressive in September, then switched to comfortable by January. By March, the house smelled like sterile hospital sheets, no matter how many windows Garrett opened. Nolan needed to go somewhere that still felt exactly like her. Ridgeline, Colorado, Jenna's tiny hometown of 3,400 people, was his last hope. He bought a quiet little house on Prospect Hill Road. It had a simple 2-bay garage and enough flat dirt out back for a shipping container, if needed. His savings covered the down payment, buying 6 months of breathing room. Nothing fancy. You and I know that narrow middle ground, that is where real life actually happens. During the daylight hours, Garrett repaired heavy farm machinery and light industrial equipment for local ranches and factories scattered across the county. He replaced hydraulic seals on local combines, rebuilt rusty gearboxes on grain augers, and rewired controls on heavy feed mixers. Steady, honest labor, decent money, the kind of work that left permanent grease in the creases of his knuckles. It put just enough cash in his account to pay the electric bill and buy Nolan new school shoes. But at night, once Nolan fell asleep, a completely different side of Garrett emerged. He would clear off the dirty workbench and pull out complex schematics on engineering paper. He worked tirelessly on a prototype water filtration system that had been in his mind for 3 solid years. The technology relied on advanced microfiltration layered with titanium mesh membranes. It ran at extreme pressure differentials he originally calculated while designing fuel systems back at Northrop Grumman. That is where he spent 9 years working as a senior systems engineer, but when Jenna got sick, suddenly nothing else mattered anymore. He actually held 2 active patents officially filed with the United States Patent Office, and he never mentioned either of them to a single soul in Ridgeline. His very first meeting with Claire Ashford happened on a quiet Tuesday in March. He walked right into the Ridgeline Community Credit Union, the only bank within 40 miles, simply asking for a $45,000 loan. The startup money was strictly for titanium mesh stock and 1 high-pressure pump. She only judged his current situation, seeing a self-employed mechanic. His monthly income looked highly irregular to her. His only assets were a house with little equity and a garage full of complex tools no local banker could ever accurately value. And he had absolutely no credit history in the state of Colorado. You and I know how easily we judge. Claire measured his worth using her dad's outdated risk model. 4 decades of history, strictly following rigid guidelines the board had approved. Garrett Cole seemed like a nobody, so she dismissed their future savior politely, professionally, and fast. She meant no harm, but she showed absolutely zero curiosity about his real potential. And Garrett never bragged about his true credentials either. He never mentioned Northrop Grumman, his patents, or his 9 years in aerospace engineering. He stubbornly believed his current work should speak louder than his past titles. He refused to trade on the corporate success of his past. He wanted his current invention to be judged solely on its merits. That night, he and little Nolan ate cheap mac and cheese at the workbench. Nolan sketched out their filtration dream using simple colored pencils. Just a wobbly drawing with crazy arrows. It made zero technical sense but perfect emotional sense for their future. He taped it right next to Garrett's brilliant technical drawing. The 2 designs hung together, showing both raw imagination and immense capability. Together, they showed a man far greater than his current struggle. Meanwhile, Claire sat alone, completely blind to the genius she had just dismissed. Doug Mercer, the powerful board chairman, stopped by on his way out. He leaned there casually, sounding fatherly, yet making a very calculated move. Your dad built this bank over 40 years by knowing exactly when to say no. Don't let one poor applicant ruin it. Claire nodded obediently. His words sounded like friendly advice, but they were a strict command. Over the next 14 months, Garrett kept fighting, applying for funding 4 more times. Each new application proved he was more than they realized. Round 2 brought signed contracts with local ranches, hard proof of his rising potential. Round 3 added meticulous blueprints, plus glowing references from clients who praised his work, calling him reliable and absolutely brilliant. His 4th attempt brought in incredible results from a food processing plant nearby, proving his unit/dangerous contamination by 91%. Claire rejected every single one. Her gut ached each time, but he never fit her rigid, superficial risk model. She trusted a cold, blind algorithm far more than her own human instincts. But that 3rd application quietly sparked a truth they couldn't ignore. It caught the eye of Pat Yoon, their senior loan officer. She stopped his file before it was dismissed upstairs. Hidden deep between the pages, Pat spotted a Northrop Grumman letter and an old award he had accidentally left inside. So Pat searched his name. Stick with me here. In 20 minutes, she uncovered 2 registered patents in 9 years as a senior systems engineer. She drafted a detailed memo attaching proof of his genius. The stellar reference letter, backed by her own glowing assessment. Her final conclusion was crystal clear. This man's true potential represents far less risk than 90% of our current clients. She strongly recommended approving his loan immediately. Here's the tragedy. Mercer hid the truth before Claire could ever see it. He called Pat inside, quietly shutting the door on a brilliant future. You aren't allowed to run outside background checks on applicants. Your job is processing paperwork by the book, not lobbying for clients. Pat understood. She didn't know why her boss wanted this small business loan buried, but she knew the cost of fighting back. She was 52 years old, a single mother raising a child. Her daughter needed braces, and this credit union's insurance was the only coverage she could afford. In this town, loan officers her age didn't just find backup jobs, so she stayed silent. By his 4th visit, Garrett sat across from Claire, facing that same old cold rejection. Claire sighed. Mr. Cole, I respect your persistence, but if your financials haven't changed, neither will our answer. Garrett just looked at her, no anger, no begging. He just sat there, carrying a heavy, quiet dignity that completely shifted the room. He replied quietly, the fundamentals shifted after my 2nd application. The question is, who's actually looking? Claire had absolutely nothing. She had never been challenged like this, not with loud shouting or angry frustration. But his incredibly quiet words made her own corporate excuses sound deafeningly loud. Let's look at what happened the 5th time he walked in. Garrett took the exact same seat he had occupied 4 times before. Claire pushed the folder forward. Another commercial loan denied for insufficient collateral. He grabbed the paperwork, stood up, gave a single nod, and walked out. Not a single argument. He did not even ask why. Watching him leave, Claire felt something she couldn't just brush off. It wasn't quite guilt, really, but a lingering dread that this man was far bigger than the application on her desk, and she had completely misjudged him. Out in the hallway, Garrett passed Pat Yoon standing by the water cooler. Pat gave him a look he had not seen from anyone else inside that bank. Barely above a whisper, she murmured, I am so sorry, Mr. Cole. I truly am. Garrett froze in his tracks, studying her for a long moment. He did not know exactly how their approval system had failed him, but he realized this woman had tried to help, only to have her hands tied. He gave her a nod, stepped out into the crisp March air, and never looked back. That night, his auto shop was dead silent, save for a buzzing overhead light. Little Nolan had fallen asleep on the beat-up couch tucked in the corner. A school pencil was still resting loosely in his tiny fingers. Garrett grabbed a worn blanket from the couch and draped it over his son's shoulders. He stood there for a minute, quietly staring at the wall. 5 harsh rejection letters pinned in a row, right beside his groundbreaking patent application. He did not rip them down in a rage, he did not trash them. He just turned back to his workbench, opened the prototype, and kept building. The only noise was metal grinding against metal and the sleeping boy's breath. The morning after his final rejection, Garrett drank black coffee while Nolan finished up his breakfast before school. Nolan chewed his breakfast thoughtfully, then asked without even looking up, "Did you visit that bank again yesterday?" Garrett replied, "Yes." Nolan paused. "What did they tell you?" Garrett sighed. "They said it just wasn't the right time." "You and I know that look." Nolan weighed those words like a kid who knew adults rarely tell the whole truth. "When exactly will it be the right time?" Garrett just stared at his son. "When we stop needing to ask them entirely." You see it, right? A crucial door was closing, just not his. They dismissed him 5 times, but now Garrett was completely done. He would never go back or beg them again. His true future lay elsewhere. That afternoon he called an old friend. Ray used to work just 2 desks down from him at Northrop Grumman. He had left to start a clean energy fund in Denver, Colorado. Ray recognized Garrett's genius. True talent sees past a temporary struggle, no fancy resume required. Garrett emailed over his hand-drawn prototype designs and a business plan written on simple notebook paper. 3 days later, Ray flew to the local airport, grabbed a rental car, and drove straight to Ridgeline. In that dusty garage, he watched the machine turn muddy water completely clear and pure. He said, "I will invest $120,000, and you keep 85%. Forget what those short-sighted local bankers told you. They have no idea what they just passed up." They signed the deal right on the workbench, right next to a dried dinner stain. Meanwhile, Claire's day at the bank went on completely uninterrupted. She had no idea the struggling mechanic she rejected had just secured 6 figures. She scanned the quarterly reports. Everything looked perfectly safe to her. Doug handed her a massive new commercial proposal for $1.8 million. A flashy real estate project planned for the wealthy East Side. Doug pushed this risky deal with highly unusual excitement. "This is our future," he insisted. "The credit union must lead." Claire hesitated. "You and I know how easily people trust shiny presentations over real, raw potential." The paperwork looked flawless, so she signed off. 2 weeks later, Claire and Garrett crossed paths at the local hardware store. Garrett was loading heavy titanium mesh into his truck. High-grade material a supposedly poor mechanic should never be able to afford. Claire saw the expensive materials but kept completely quiet. "How is business, Mr. Cole?" she asked. He looked back and said, "Growing." No anger or sarcasm. He did not even mention her rejection. Watching him drive away, she realized he did not look like a defeated man. He carried himself like someone building a massive empire. She couldn't name the difference, but she couldn't ignore it. That same week, Garrett officially filed the paperwork for his brand new business. He pinned the license right next to his son's crayon drawing. Young Nolan saw it right after school and asked exactly what it meant. "Means our little garage finally has a real name," he smiled. Nolan looked at the boring certificate, then stared at his drawing. "Mine looks way better." "It certainly does," Garrett laughed. 6 months later, that ignored garage sounded entirely different. 3 new employees worked alongside Garrett, including Marcus Webb. A 50-year-old miner laid off when the local copper mine closed. And Elena, a brilliant 30-year-old certified welder. Let's remember, never judge someone by their current situation. She outwelded every single veteran. Next was young Tommy Aldridge, 22. Fresh out of community college with a basic tech degree. But more importantly, he was that overlooked kid who always showed up early and stayed late, completely on his own. Garrett personally trained all 3 of them. Patient, remarkably precise, and he never once had to raise his voice. The garage everyone wrote off now housed 3 dedicated workstations and a real assembly line for his filtration units. The money coming in was undeniably real. 2 big filtration contracts for a local Weld County dairy brought in $38,000, plus a $52,000 installation for a Fort Collins food plant, along with 4 smaller local farm setups. You and I can see it. Cole Precision Systems was officially thriving. Big, steady deposits kept rolling in. The bank finally took notice. In a town of 3,400, gossip traveled incredibly fast. The struggling mechanic they all dismissed was suddenly hiring local workers. The local credit union watched 3 new payroll accounts hit their system. each receiving regular deposits from a business called Cole Precision Systems. Local business cash flow at the bank started climbing for the first time in months. Claire, the CEO, saw the name on a deposit report and froze. Cole Precision Systems. She opened her computer and began researching the filtration industry. For once, she wasn't looking for a reason to deny him. Now she desperately needed to understand the massive potential she had blindly ignored. She quickly pulled up his patent filings in the federal database. She slowly read the technical details twice. Alone in her office, she finally realized the brilliant potential of the project Garrett had placed on her desk 5 separate times. She had only looked at his struggling numbers, totally blind to the amazing invention those numbers were trying to fund. Just 1 week later, Garrett walked back into that bank to set up a corporate account. His initial deposit was so huge it actually required a manager's signature. Now Claire didn't have to come downstairs to handle this. Any regular employee could process it, but she chose to step in. She walked down to the teller window, looked over the papers, and signed. Then she said, "Congratulations on your business, Mr. Cole." Garrett simply looked at her. "Thank you, Ms. Ashford." No anger in his voice and no mention of those 5 rejections. His quiet dignity hurt worse than shouting ever could, leaving Claire with absolutely no way to explain her past judgment. No opportunity to defend her old decisions. You see, she was trapped by a man who proved he never needed her approval to succeed. Word of the new hires soon reached Doug Mercer. That same night, he carefully studied the county zoning maps from home. The land around Garrett's busy shop sat right inside the commercial area that Ridgeline Development desperately wanted to control. If this ignored little startup kept growing, their expensive corporate plans would be completely ruined. Doug quickly wrote a reminder in his planner. He chose to keep quiet, not saying a single word to Claire or the board. Follow me on this. True financial ruin never starts with a giant crash, but with one quiet missed payment. Ridgeline held that $1.8 million commercial loan Doug had pushed so hard to approve. They had missed their second quarterly payment. The developer immediately begged for more time, pointing to supply chain delays and building permit issues. Doug assured Claire it was perfectly normal. Commercial real estate moves at its own speed. These things always work themselves out. Let me call them. You and I both know that feeling, I agreed, but Doug's reassurance came way too fast. It was too polished, like he rehearsed those exact words before I even asked. I quietly started my own internal investigation. I pulled the Ridgeline Summit file from the vault, comparing the original appraisal to actual land sales within a 30-mile radius. That appraisal was 30% higher than anything the actual market could support. The variance waiver carried Doug's signature as our board chairman. I clearly lacked the full picture, but the ugly outline of a massive cover-up was forming and I could not unsee it. Meanwhile, the man I misjudged kept growing. He landed a third major contract, a $67,000 filtration system for a Boulder brewery. Then came a fourth, a municipal water treatment pilot program for a small western slope town. Garrett hired 4 more workers. His small business now employed 7 people. He leased the warehouse right next to his property just to handle the volume. His sign was small, but the workstations were completely spotless. Their quality control process was absolutely relentless. Still humble yet fiercely professional. Garrett and I crossed paths again at a town hall meeting about the local water infrastructure. An engineering report flagged the municipal filtration system as desperately overdue for replacement. They invited Garrett up to answer technical questions from the council, not as a salesman, but as the only guy in the room who truly understood water filtration at a molecular level. He spoke clearly, precisely, with zero fluff. Sitting in the back row, I saw the brilliant man I had previously dismissed. He was never just some struggling mechanic with a dream. He was a brilliant engineer who knew exactly what he was doing from the very beginning. I realized I had not just misjudged a loan file, I had misjudged his true worth. Let's face it, judging a person by their current struggles is always a massive mistake. Right after the meeting, Pat Yoon tracked me down out in the parking lot. She spoke quietly, staring down at the pavement. "There was a memo I sent you 14 months ago regarding the Cole loan file. It never reached your desk. You need to find it." I just stared at her in silence. Pat said nothing else, walking to her car. I immediately drove back to the office. I logged into the database, hunting for any internal memo tied to Garrett's startup loan. Nothing. It was missing from my inbox, the digital archives, and the applicant file. I checked Pat's sent folder. It was completely empty. Someone erased or blocked the message before it ever reached my desk. I grabbed my phone and called Pat at home. A heavy silence filled the line. Finally, Pat whispered, "I know who did it, and I kept a copy." We met the next morning in my office before the bank doors even opened. Pat dropped 3 printed pages on my desk, a personal email draft she saved 14 months ago as insurance for this exact disaster. The memo laid out his true background in harsh, clinical detail. Garrett Cole, senior systems engineer at Northrop Grumman for 9 years. Active security clearance, 2 United States patent filing numbers and dates. Technical breakdowns of microfiltration membrane tech built for agricultural and municipal water systems. Pat's detailed professional assessment. It was written with the cold caution of someone who spent 26 years measuring risk, not human worth. The applicant's incredible skills and valuable intellectual property. Look closer and we know he was actually a remarkably safe bet. He deserved standard loan approval, so Pat finally confessed everything to Claire. Doug had cornered her, locked the door, and ordered her to walk away. For 14 months she kept silent, not because of loyalty but from pure fear. Her child needed medical care, making that health insurance an absolute lifeline. At 52 in a small town, a disgraced officer never gets a second chance. Staring directly at Claire, she whispered, "I don't expect you to forgive my silence. I just need you to finally hear the truth." Claire sat clutching the paper as 2 harsh realities collided in her mind. First, she realized she had been completely fooled. Doug intentionally hid the facts, so all 5 of her loan rejections relied on completely rigged data. But the second truth stung much worse. Even without Doug's meddling, she had judged a good man purely by his surface. Garrett did not fit the perfect borrower mold, and she never once questioned that bias. The deception was on Doug, but the blind judgment was entirely her fault. She spent hours scanning property filings, business records, and hidden corporate documents. You and I are about to discover why she froze at her computer screen. That massive $1.8 million loan for Ridgeline Summit Development was secretly run by a shell company where Doug Mercer owned 22%. He manipulated the bank to fund a massive development that lined his own pockets, while denying a tiny $45,000 loan to a struggling honest father, whose property blocked the exact land corridor his greedy project required. This was no mistake, but a trap. Blair called Garrett later that afternoon. She suggested meeting far from the bank at Cedar Grounds, the local coffee shop. Arriving early, she waited. When Garrett arrived, she quietly slid the memo to him. "I only read this for the very first time today. My loan officer wrote it 14 months ago regarding your business application. Someone hid it from me, but I am not sharing this to make excuses. My signature approved all 5 rejections, and I came to face you directly. I was completely wrong." Garrett stared hard at the paper, refusing to touch it. Finally, he answered, "I do not need your validation, Miss Ashford, but I respect you for saying it straight." He did not offer forgiveness, but he did not attack her. The silence between those 2 paths felt incredibly narrow and heavy. Yet that is where 2 humans finally see each other, stripping away corporate titles and paperwork. Blair drove home along Route 6. Halfway there, she pulled over and killed the engine. She just sat in silence, gripping the steering wheel, staring blankly at the rocky ridge that gave this town its name. A dark, jagged shadow bleeding into a fading copper sky. For the very first time, she stopped running and faced her prejudice. Terrified of taking a risk, she had completely forgotten how to do the right thing. The true cost was much deeper than a rejected business loan. She lost his trust. Remember, those we overlook often become our only salvation. You and I know life has a way of balancing things. That Thursday, Ridgeline's developer went bankrupt. By Friday afternoon, the massive loss slammed the credit union, dragging down their balance sheet like a heavy stone in deep water. $1.8 million was gone. For a tiny institution with only $28 million in assets, this spelled ruin. Bad loans completely blew past federal safety limits. Their cash reserves dropped right below the legal minimum. Within just 2 weeks, federal regulators hit them with a harsh official warning. They had exactly 90 days to stabilize their cash, or the government would step in. That meant a federal takeover, tight restrictions, or getting bought out by a rival. The clock started ticking immediately. Claire desperately called an emergency board meeting. Standing at the head of the table, she laid everything bare, starting with that fake appraisal, Doug's hidden share in the real estate deal, and the memo he buried. She exposed the massive web of lies that poisoned the bank for 2 whole years. Across the room, Pat Yoon backed up every claim with hard facts and exact dates. She presented archived emails and the actual secret memo. The board's vote was unanimous. Doug Mercer was instantly stripped of his chairmanship, facing a full, massive audit. Doug slowly stood up, buttoned his jacket, and threw Claire a cold, silent threat of a look. "You just burned the only bridge I ever built for you." Claire stared him down until the heavy door clicked shut. But getting rid of Doug did not magically patch that massive financial crater. They desperately needed a major business depositor to inject fresh cash before the 90-day deadline hit. Claire reviewed their business accounts, 47 in total, and almost all of them were tiny. The largest name on the entire list was Cole Precision Systems. Their monthly cash deposits had been quietly skyrocketing for 6 straight months. This is where you and I see the real lesson about not writing someone off. The struggling dad she rejected 5 times was the only person who could save them. Swallowing her pride, she called him, all of her old corporate arrogance completely gone. "The credit union is in serious trouble, Mr. Cole. I have no right to ask you for anything, not after 5 rejections. But if you are open to listening, I have a real business proposal, not a favor." Business. Garrett let 5 painfully heavy seconds tick by in silence. Claire had faced down aggressive developers and tough federal regulators. But she had never sweat through a silence as heavy as this one. Finally he spoke, "Send me the numbers." Claire rushed the proposal over by morning. Garrett's firm would step in as the credit union's primary institutional investor. In exchange, he secured a top-tier commercial line of credit and free payroll services, plus a permanent board seat, giving him real power over future small business loans. The circle closed. It felt beautifully designed, not just some random stroke of luck. The very same man they denied a simple $45,000 loan. Now, as you and I can see, he sits in the power seat deciding who survives. That evening, Garrett read the paperwork on his greasy workbench, right where those 5 brutal rejection letters used to hang in a row. You and I know what it is like to be written off. I stared at their letterhead, then at my patent application. A cold, half-eaten sandwich sat forgotten on the corner of my workbench. The workshop looked exactly like it had just a few months ago. But the paperwork on my table told a completely different story now. I did not rush. I called Ray Tanaka out in Denver. "Our local credit union is facing imminent federal action. They want me to drop a massive deposit and join their advisory board." Ray went completely silent for a moment. Then he spoke with the blunt pragmatism of someone who has seen money do beautiful and terrible things. "From a pure business perspective, you hold all the cards right now. But if you are stepping in for personal reasons, you had better know exactly what they are." I said, "I know." After a long pause, Ray asked, "Her?" I stayed quiet a second too long. Ray finally said, "All right. Just call me when you need a lawyer to look over that agreement." But I honestly was not thinking about Claire. I was thinking about Ridgeline, about Marcus Webb, 50 years old, with rough hands that spent 3 decades working deep underground. Now assembling our water filters with such steady precision, he puts aerospace engineers to shame. And Elena Ruiz, who wired funds to her mother in Pueblo every single month without ever missing a shift. And young Tommy Aldridge. He had just signed the lease on his first apartment, finally leaving his childhood bedroom behind. That failing credit union did not really belong to Claire Ashford. It was where Marcus deposited his hard-earned paycheck every other Friday, where Elena kept the modest savings account she built with her first factory paycheck, and where Tommy had set up the automatic payment for his rent. If that bank collapsed, 3,400 households would lose their only bank within 40 miles. The closest alternative was a regional bank in Glenwood Springs that never once sent a loan officer to sit in a kitchen and ask what they needed. That evening, my son Nolan walked into the garage and found me sitting completely still, staring blankly at paperwork instead of building. "What are you thinking about?" my boy asked. I replied, "Whether I should help the very people who refuse to help me." Nolan thought about this, using that deep concentration he saved for things he truly cared about. "Is she a bad person?" he asked. "No," I said, "just wrong." Then Nolan spoke with that pure honesty only a child can deliver without any hesitation. "Then help her," he said. "You always say people deserve a chance to fix their mistakes." I just stared at my boy. You and I know sometimes an 11-year-old sees right through the walls a 40-year-old builds around a simple answer. I called Claire the next morning. "I am in one condition, and it is not financial. I want the credit union to set up a micro-loan fund for small businesses in Ridgeline. People exactly like me just 2 years ago. Applications that fail on paper, but have real people with dreams worth building behind them." Claire was completely quiet on the other end for several long seconds. Finally, she whispered, "Deal. Stick with me here." We signed the papers in the exact same conference room where they had denied me 5 separate times. Claire sat silently across from me. We've all seen how tables turn. Neither spoke of the poetic justice, but they felt it. That heavy pen changed everything. Garrett signed first, then Claire did. Pat Yoon watched closely, her hand visibly shaking as she initialed every single page. When Garrett stood up, Pat smiled warmly. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Cole." He looked at the only clerk who saw past his poor situation back then, the one who suffered 14 months of silence for her kindness. He replied, "You should have been sitting at this table a long time ago, Miss Yoon." Just 3 months later, the once failing credit union was completely back on its feet. His company deposited $2.1 million. This made the dismissed mechanic, whom they once judged their biggest depositor by far. Federal regulators wrapped up their audit, formally declaring the bank fully funded and secure. The intense 90-day crisis dissolved just as quietly as it had started. Most residents never suspected that their hometown bank almost went under right before their eyes. Their new microloan fund quickly supported 4 underestimated locals. First, a custom furniture carpenter. Next, an overlooked mechanic building a second service bay. An ambitious farmer switching to organic, and a mother starting a home daycare center. These loans ranged from $15,000 to $40,000. Garrett personally attended every single board meeting. He didn't vote on the business loans, as that wasn't his place. Instead, he focused on one crucial question for every single applicant they reviewed. "Let's reflect on this. What is this person building?" Claire soon turned his question into official bank policy. Before long, the loan officers began calling this screening rule the Cole Standard. Garrett was completely unaware. Meanwhile, Claire promoted Pat to vice president of lending. At the staff meeting gathered to announce the promotion, Claire spoke directly to everyone. Pat was the only person in this entire building who looked past appearances. She saw the human value, even when corporate rules were set up to keep everyone blind to it. This entire organization owes her far more than just a fancy title. Pat stood quietly at the back of the room, crying tears of pure relief. For the first time in 26 years, someone in charge looked past her status and acknowledged her truth, affirming without a doubt that her instincts about people had been correct all along. Slowly, the dynamic between Garrett and Claire began to shift, though neither was brave enough to voice it. They remained strictly businesslike and professional during the monthly board sessions. Yet subtle interactions kept building quietly like soft snow piling on a branch. Insignificant on their own, but together impossible to ignore. She always handed him black coffee with no sugar. She never had to ask for his order. Garrett would send over obscure water industry documents she hadn't even requested. Yet they always turned out to be the precise information she needed to build her next strategy. She would forward helpful articles on rural funding at 11 p.m. without any explanation. Neither ever mentioned these small gestures, but Pat was watching closely and saw it all. She simply kept her observations to herself, smiling quietly at the change. Pay close attention. This is where the story shifts. It all happened on a quiet Saturday at the local market. Garrett was there with young Nolan, picking out some fruit. Claire stood just a few feet away, browsing a vegetable stand. Nolan looked closely at Claire, then turned to his father with a question. Ever underestimate someone just because they are struggling? The boy's voice echoed through the market. Is this the lady you said was just wrong and not mean? Garrett shut his eyes. Nolan, I whispered. No, let him speak, Mr. Cole. The kid stared at me, carrying the deep, serious look of a child who had been quietly processing things much longer than any adult ever realized. My dad said you fixed it. I knelt down, meeting his incredibly sharp, intense gaze. Your dad is right, and I'm still fixing it. Just a quiet, genuine moment. No big show, no real crowd except for a crate of late summer peaches. But that was when I finally saw the real Garrett, entering his life through a door only his son could open. 6 months after the deal, the startup we nearly ignored employed 14 people. This rising company held active, solid contracts with 3 Colorado municipalities and a county water district. Their projected yearly revenue quickly reached $1.4 million. That messy, cramped garage on Prospect Hill Road, still their proud headquarters. Garrett declined 2 offers to expand. That humble garage was where his brilliance started, and he refused to leave it. Little Nolan even hand-drew their logo, a single water droplet resting inside a gear. The pencil marks were bold and confident, proof of how much the boy had grown. Garrett scanned the sketch, digitized it on his computer, and made it their official brand. They proudly stamped it on every single water filter shipped out the door. My local credit union had now completely recovered. Federal regulators officially upgraded our status to fully well-capitalized. The microloan fund I started actually became a state banking association case study. Here is the lesson for us. It became a model for looking past outward appearances. Eventually, they invited me to present at a major banking summit in Denver. I stepped on stage and shared our journey, refusing to hide my own foolish mistakes. I rejected my smartest borrower 5 times, I confessed, blinded entirely by his current situation. Don't judge based on struggles, Doug's. Corporate investigation concluded with a massive fiduciary duty violation charge. He escaped prison, mostly because his greedy tactics barely stayed on the legal side of fraud. Even so, the State Division of Financial Services banned him for life from managing any financial institution in Colorado. He quietly sold his expensive Main Street mansion and ran away to Phoenix. There was never some dramatic confrontation or a screaming fight in the boardroom. Just a listing sign put up on Tuesday, gone by the following Monday morning. See, superficial power without real substance always crumbles in total silence. Much later, on a warm June afternoon, I drove back up to that humble garage, carrying new loan requests for Garrett to evaluate first. I showed up 20 minutes early, finding his garage door wide open. Young Nolan sat cross-legged on the hard floor, happily sketching away. The boy's drawings had truly evolved, his pencil lines showing incredible confidence. His machine designs looked remarkably precise. Even his notes had matured, no longer looking like a child's scribble, but like a real young engineer's handwriting. This time I did not wait outside for his father to invite me in. I simply walked right inside and sat beside his brilliant son on the cool concrete. I picked up a blue-colored pencil from his box and gently began shading the water lines on his blueprint. No one invited me in, and absolutely no one complained. Never judge a person by their current struggles. Nolan checked her sketch, matched her shading, and slid his pencils over, acting like she had always belonged there. Garrett walked out of the back office, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. 1 black coffee for himself and 1 for Claire. He actually brewed it before she got there, even though she was early. Almost like his gut knew the desperate executive would arrive way ahead of schedule. He spotted them on the floor, his son and the humbled executive, heads bowed over blueprints, sketching quietly together. He paused in the doorway, leaning his shoulder quietly against the wooden frame. Without saying a word, he just watched until Claire finally looked up. Their eyes locked across the garage floor, right past the heavy workbench and assembly stations. Past the exact wall where her bank's 5 harsh rejection letters had once hung in a row. No dramatic speeches and certainly no kiss. Just the quiet gaze of 2 bruised people realizing something unexpected was finally starting to grow between them. It just happened naturally, without any need to announce it or force a label. Garrett set the coffee on his heavy workbench and walked right over. He sat down on the cold concrete floor beside them both. Without even looking up, his son slid a wooden pencil toward him. You and I must remember this moment. They sat drawing in the same workspace where a struggling father and his boy once faced 5 harsh corporate rejections. Claire had finally returned for a 6th time. But this time, neither of them cared about keeping score.